We're back with Carlin and Inside F2 to understand how the aerodynamics of a Formula 2 car work for 2022. A lot of it you'll know from Formula 1. For example, the front wing, slowing the air over the top surface and speeding it underneath to make sure there's a nice big high pressure zone pushing the air down towards the floor as it tries to reach the low pressure below. The difference though between Formula 2 and Formula 1 is that teams are not allowed to develop any of these areas of the car. Only the parts which are supplied by chassis supplier Dallara are allowed to be used, and only in the configurations in which they're supplied exactly by the chassis manufacturer. The car though itself is also a wing in its entirety. The underfloor venturi speeding the air underneath and evacuating it, pushing the car down to the road. Again, those areas are not allowed to be changed or augmented, but what teams can do is choose how the car flies through the air, using the suspension elements to control its attitude to the air as it meets it, changing the amount of downforce it produces and the balance of this downforce between the front and the rear of the car. Let's take a look at some of those suspension elements and work out how that's achieved. As the rear suspension compresses under the load of the downforce delivered by the floor and the wings, teams can control the spring rates, roll bars and dampers to make sure that the rear of the car sinks down towards the road at the right rate and to the right destination ride height, controlling something called rake, which is the difference between the front ride height and the rear ride height as the car moves along. This has a very, very specific effect, and a very powerful effect too, on the way that the car moves through the air and how it produces downforce. And it's one of the key differences between those teams who have a fast Formula 2 car and those teams who have a slow one. The understanding of how the body moves through the air is one of the critical elements to understanding how a spec series single-seater works and getting the absolute most performance out of one of these cars. When I look at the way the car is dealing with the air, the teams are really nailed down on how they build the cars to maximize the body movement. There's a very big limitation on how the barge boards can be presented to the air. They have to fit in a very specific box. And the underfloor strakes, which seal up the delivery of air through the floor, can only be a very specific height off the ground, as presented by the manufacturer. Rear wing moves through the air with upper and lower planes, generating downforce. Teams can adjust the angle in general of the rear wing, but of course one of the key factors of feeder series racing is the DRS actuation, which is driven hydraulically from a pump just on top of the bell housing at the back of the engine. This opens the flap and allows air to escape through the gap between this main plane and the DRS plane, reducing of course the amount of downforce the wing is producing, but also reducing the level of drag produced by the wing, allowing the car to move faster through the air and potentially put an overtake on the car ahead. DRS available at all times, of course, in the DRS zones throughout qualifying and practice, but only when you're within a second of the car ahead in racing conditions. All of these elements aim to keep the racing as close as possible and prevent teams developing the cars, spending money to move ahead of the competition, and making for a non-level playing field in what is still a feeder series formula.